All right, who went to DEF CON this year? I see one hand. Is that really all we got? Just one person? Okay, great. How many of you heard about this? The room checks. I see a few more hands, right? So I had the opportunity, first time ever in Vegas, first time ever at DEF CON, to go this year. So I did, but I was a little worried about this, right? Now, you might have heard the update to this, right? Because there was a pretty fascinating update to this, where it turns out that those room checks at that one hotel might have had some, criminal activity going on, and there was speculation whether or not that was related. However, I didn't, really want to deal with that at all, so I came prepared. Now, turns out Park MGM, which is where I stayed, is not Resorts World. So it really didn't matter. And if you're wondering, what is this Watch the Watchers, Watch the Tool Talk? PoE camera going to NVR over VPN. If you know all those terms, you already know this whole talk. Don't worry about it. If you are interested in this, great. Here we are. I'll continue. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a camera in my hotel room that I could watch in case someone came in and did a room search or whatever. I wanted to be able to have some sort of documentation of that, if nothing else. I own 3 of these devices that are on the screen. I don't always make good financial choices, but I have hobbies. One of them is sitting up here, and if the demo gods, do their thing, great. I already had to rebuild it from Docker on up just during the 101. So it's even more fragile than I thought it was. Here's the hardware for the PoE camera, some examples, so that I'm not just using acronyms without saying them. PoE is power over Ethernet. It's a sort of bunch of specifications. I think it started as one spec, and then, of course, you know how things tumble on. IEEE stuff that says, how can you safely give power over an Ethernet cable so that you don't need separate power, right? So that the power just comes from the Ethernet, and it's used in all sorts of stuff from access points, cameras. I think they even have speakers now that are PoE powered. It can do a lot of stuff. So the one on the far left here, I believe, is what I ended up purchasing, and that's what I took with me. Fun fact, if they're a really durable outdoor rated camera, they usually survive the TSA baggage handlers, so that's fun. Hardware and software. If you want to do this, you'll need something in the hotel room to give PoE to the camera, right? The little travel router isn't going to do that. So I brought a PoE injector. They also make little PoE switches. You could also just take a whole 48-port PoE switch if you really wanted to. And then you need something offsite, right? If you're worried about maybe someone doing a search, deciding that something now belongs to them. As I heard, it was anything with antennas were catching the eyes this year at DEF CON. You want something offsite to VPN connect to, and then NVR. So VPN being virtual private network, and NVR being network video recorder. So the other thing is, if you don't bring a cell phone dedicated for this, you're going to be dependent on hotel Wi-Fi, which kind of can break the whole thing. More on that in a bit, I believe. So the general network layout is sort of this mess. So you can see that I've got off to one side on the 192.168.0/24 subnet. I have my network video recorder. And then I have the firewall, which in this case I used OpenSense, which gets a public IPv4 address, right? And then clouds, because everything's clouds these days. And there's a VPN tunnel that sort of goes, through the clouds, but I just drew it as a second line there. And then the hotel gives a private IPv4 address to the little travel router, and then there's a camera that gets an IP address behind the NAT, right? So the travel router is effectively creating a double NAT. So this camera is behind the NAT of the travel router and behind the NAT of the hotel's Wi-Fi. And the travel router punches out and becomes a client to whatever VPN server I have off to the left side over here, right? So if you want to know how to do this, just follow OpenSense's setup guide. This is both the written out URL and a QR code for the URL. If you care about that, if you're watching this later, whatever, just follow their guide. That's all I did. I just followed it exactly. making sure to assign an interface. There's a part in it where it's like, hey, you can do this interface if you want. You don't have to, but we kind of recommend it. I've done it both ways, and I've regretted not assigning an interface. So assign an interface. Within the travel router that I have, all 4 of those devices, I believe you saw a few slides back, were from a company that's gl.inet. They're, I believe, based out of Hong Kong. The firmware has been checked. So far, nobody's found any backdoors. You can also just flash them with stock OpenWRT, but by default, they run sort of OpenWRT Plus. You can actually access the OpenWRT UI if you want, but they layer a little bit simplified web UI on top of that. So basically, following that guide from OpenSense, you just take the client information and paste it in here. And because I don't want all of you connecting to my VPN, it's just a bunch of little black lines. But that's sort of what it'll look like. Then you need to port forward, right? Because it's double natted. So now there's a sort of a virtual interface on the GL.inet device, on the travel router, that's the VPN client, but it's got NAT, right? So all the devices behind it are now connected to whatever the VPN you set up for that. But that doesn't do a lot of good if you're trying to access the camera from remote, right? If the camera needed to access something, great. But if you're trying to access the camera from other, you need a port forward. Again, GL.inet makes this really easy. You just go in, you say port forward, you set your external as the WireGuard client. If you did it like I do, there's also OpenVPN client if that's your thing. And then tell it which internal IP, right? The PoE camera, what's its IP address within the NAT of the travel router. And there you go. That's pretty much it. So I also wanted this thing, because the NVR system I was using, it gets very, very angry if it's trying to view a camera feed that doesn't exist. And it basically fills the logs, and when you're running on spinning disks and it's just writing dozens of SQL logs per second, that leads to performance issues. So I have this control page that has a bunch of other buttons, as you can kind of see, that I've blanked out for the purposes of this talk. But I left the VPN camera on and off. So when I hit the off button, it runs a script that hits the API for the NVR and disables that camera. And when I hit the on, it just runs the enable for that camera. So the results, right? How did this work? Well, hotel Wi-Fi being hotel Wi-Fi, not that well. But here is an example screenshot with, again, a lot of it blurred. You can see sort of in the upper right corner, there's the travel router sitting on a ledge in the hotel room, and you can see it did work enough to get a picture and a screenshot. This was a nighttime example with the IR LEDs built into the camera. You can see it sort of lighting up the table a bit with that, and if someone were to come in, you'd be able to see them. This was what it looked like in the daytime. This was me off trying to make a checklist before I was leaving. And forgot that I might want screenshots, so I just went and grabbed this footage later. But decent, you know, maybe gonna pick someone out, maybe not, but at least enough to say what happened if you needed to know what happened. So to sort of summarize now, how well did it work? I touched on it a bit, not great, because it was dependent on hotel Wi-Fi. It did work as a proof of concept, and that was one of the biggest goals for this, right? Was learning, trying something new, having something to improve on in the future. In the future, if I do this, I will definitely have a dedicated device of some sort, probably a phone with a prepaid wireless unlimited plan that I can just tether to the travel router, so I'm not dependent on it. So would I do it again? Yes. Should you do it? Probably not. Doesn't really seem worth the effort. However, that said, demo time. Live demo with the Interrobang. It is, if you would like to visit this yourself, it is very, very fragile. It is running on an 80 by 10 CenturyLink DSL connection. Yeah, so demo.thesketchyweb.site. Username and password are both secDSM. And I'm going to attempt to see if I can do that here in a minute. But before I get all completely out of my presentation, are there any questions? No questions? All right. Here's the part where we see just how broke it might be, if I can remember how to do this. So if I go over here, and I go out of full screen, and I go back to there, and I refresh, see if it's live. Okay, and then I make this full screen, and then I click on the camera, and maybe, and then if I go in front of it, and you see that I'm over here, ooh, or you don't. Wow. That lag is something else, isn't it? So I should note, this is going over the venue's Wi-Fi, and yeah, y'all are making it mad, but it works, right? So for those that maybe didn't quite follow, here's what the signal path is. The camera has a PoE injector, the PoE injector into the travel router over the venue Wi-Fi, from the venue Wi-Fi through the internets to my home lab firewall, through my home lab firewall to a server, to the server's Docker container, then back out through the firewall again, through the website, and then back out through the internet, and then from the venue's Wi-Fi to this laptop to the screen. So yeah, lots of spots for latency, but it works. And that's all I got. Any questions, thoughts, comments, heckles? Yeah. Have I tried using the SD card as a NAS? No. I've been burned too many times by Raspberry Pi SD cards just giving me middle fingers that I did not opt for that. The closest I come to using an SD card as a NAS is dash cams. And if you want to talk on creative uses of dash cams, I can make one of those too, because I've got stories. On the GL, no, I'm not even sure that this has SD. It does have USB, so you could plug something in. If I were going to do that, I would use the SD slot that's typically built into these cameras. But no, I haven't tried that. You would then also need to run your NVR on here, or run the NVR separately and have it pipe back to there. I feel like that would be a recipe for performance issues, like capital P and capital I, performance issues. Good questions, though. Any other questions? Yeah. Have I had any issues with hotel networks not allowing me to do this because of routery stuff, basically? Yes and no. So I have done this in exactly one hotel now over the course of one DEF CON trip, so I don't have a lot of data. My personal experience with hotels in general is they generally just don't have much other than, there's some Wi-Fi, right? So I haven't seen much of that. However, I could not for the life of me get the Ethernet port in the room to work, but it also looked like it had been recently serviced, whether by a legitimate person or not, I'm not sure. But I did eventually get the Wi-Fi part to work. So no, I haven't run into it. Yes, it probably is something you could run into, but it's more likely to have an issue with the VPN than being a router. I can't hear. What's up? Good question. So the question was, did the hotel need to set up any port forwards for this to work? And the answer is no, because I'm sort of abusing a VPN in a backwards way. So the travel router acts as a client, similar to how you would do any other VPN client, where it can typically punch through multiple layers of NAT. And then because it's already punched through all that, it's just within the home lab network, I'm able to turn around and say, okay, now port forward back through that same tunnel that you've already established. Any other questions, thoughts, heckles, bad ideas? No? All right, cool. Have a good one. Andy will be up here in a few minutes.